Welcome, everybody. How are you doing? Thank you for coming. It's a very special evening, and we may want to do some deep focusing here. So I know I get a little distracted when I hear a buzz or a ding. So if you'll take a moment to turn your phones off or silence them, that would be appreciated. Just to let you know, we like to take these chances to learn with Rabbi Wolf and continue the journey together. So if there's a time and a day you'd like to continue this discussion of things we're learning with Laibl, there's some lists in the back, and you can please put your name down and also whatever day and time is most convenient. And where I see there's enough people, we'll try and set up something so we can continue learning together. I think, just as an introduction, I think it's safe to say as the time goes on, we see there's more and more of a thirst for understanding about meditation and understanding about spirituality in the Jewish community. And so I think it's so lucky that we have teachers like Laibl, who is really as comfortable giving a lecture to Fortune 500 conventions or psychology conventions as with having an invited 2-hour audience with the Dalai Lama to share notes, or visiting communities across the world and sharing really important wisdoms, which are the Jewish meditation techniques, but really presented in a way that you or I could use tomorrow and next week in really beautiful ways. And just recently, Laibl put together a series of meditation materials that were used for a course taught at 400 centers around the world to about 20,000 people. So we're really kind of, if you're into the energetics, we're really kind of have a wave behind us, and I hope that you'll have a wonderful evening sharing and learning with Rabbi Laibl Wolf. Please welcome him.
Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. And I'm particularly honored to be here. I've had a lengthy period of time of discussing, learning with Michael, with Cantor Smolesh, and to be in his community is, for me, a particular honor. And to see all of you, because every one of you, hopefully tonight, will be my teacher and will share with me. And the only way that will happen is if we have a Socratic dialogue instead of a monologue, because I have heard myself before. Now, I know that invariably, those people who introduce me tell everybody, turn off your cell phone, as was the case. And I immediately counter that and ask you to turn it back on. And people wonder, why? Well, you know full well what inordinate amount of time you took to choose your jingle. And therefore, when it sings for us, it tells me a lot about you. And I get to know my audience immediately through that medium. So do feel free to keep your cell phones on. Every person seated in this room is a unique, reincarnated soul brought into the universe because you have something to individually offer that no one else in the world can. There is absolutely no reason why God chose to bring you back other than you possess a gift that no one else does. You have never lived before in this particular personality, nor will do so. And therefore, this is the opportunity of sharing a unique giftedness. Shortly, we will discuss that in context of self-esteem and self-worth. But I wanted to say that That's why I do want to learn from you. So please don't be shy. Share. The kind of world in which we live in has a babble of voices instructing us, telling us, in fact, mentally forcing and influencing us. We're living in the time of mass media, and you and I know that media is not a beneficent educational institution. The media is a commercially exploitative mechanism whose singular purpose is that you should part with your dollars and cents. The media also is very psychologically aware that if it can make you afraid, you'll be riveted to the screen and their ratings will rise and they'll have more advertisers. And therefore, by nature, the media is fearful or fear-laden. And there's no better example of that than the so-called neutral evening news. The evening news is a very carefully crafted, produced program where all the most negative aspects of the world are concisely spliced together with the resultant effect that, yes, we are glued to the screen and we come back for more. And therefore, it's in this day and age that our individuality, that our sense of values, the criteria we use in order to make sense out of a volatile life that is now, because of economic integration of the world, constantly changing, to allow ourselves to have some stability. Now, in the long run, that requires each one of us to formulate a set of values. That's not what tonight is about. Tonight is about how to create that space where we can balance mind and emotion to give us the opportunity to apply sensibility. Because by and large, we don't provide that opportunity. So I'm going to speak initially about the nature of stress and worry, knowing full well that it's inapplicable to you because you are a very developed audience. But out there are people who do have stress and worry, and you'll be able to advise them. And then I want to talk a bit more about sense of personal significance. And then I want to share with you what is meditation. So those of you who now realize that you've come to absolutely the wrong lecture, this is a wonderful moment to leave. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck here for the duration. Okay, are there any questions at this point? All right, I'll have to be a bit more provocative. Voices in the head and voices from the outside. The irony is, the quieter we become, the more we can hear. You know, when you go out to the countryside, away from the highways, and finally hear the birds, and even hear the rustle of the leaves, and begin to become akin again with something very natural within us. What a wonderful and beautiful feeling that is. And we've lost that by and large. And I want to translate that into spiritual terms so that we can actually hear and listen to the still small voice that each one of us possesses, which is really part of our antenna that can define who we are and how to navigate the pathway in our life. So, as I said, we're going to deal with these 3 items. Let me begin with stress and worry. What is it? What are stress and worry? So let me give you a definition. And the definition will provide you with a counterpoint to what you conventionally believe stress to be. Listen carefully. Stress is the dissonance between the way I want the world to be and the way it actually is. It's the gap between the way I want my children to behave and the way they actually behave. It's the gap between the way I want my environment to be and the way it actually is. That gap is experienced as stress. Stress doesn't exist out there. You don't catch stress like a cold. Stress is a production unit within you that produces it of your own volition, or more likely by habit. You create stress, not the world, not your children, and not your environment. And if you characterize that stress negatively, that becomes worry. So the question, I suppose, is it inevitable? And if we produce it, can I produce a much better product? And the answer is absolutely yes. You do not have to be stressed, and you do not have to worry. I don't remember if I shared this last year or not. Michael, you can tell me. Did I make the seemingly ridiculous statement that Judaism teaches that one should never express anger under any circumstances whatsoever, without exception, period? And I remember that you got angry with me when I said that. And some of you wondered, who is this guy? He holds a master's in psychology and he's never heard about the importance of venting, getting it out of your system, or it'll cause untold damage within, splatter you on the walls of your house. At least get hold of a broom and hit the bed 100 times and sublimate it. You're all familiar with that, aren't you? Why? Because 3 generations of psychologists have been telling you that. And in the last 7 years, they've been proven wrong. What we know, and it's in a field that's becoming more commonly known as neuroplasticity, that when you repeat something, it's very likely that you'll continue to repeating it more often and more formidably. That every time you vent anger, you're creating a dress rehearsal for the next occasion. It gets rid of nothing. It simply emboldens it for the next occasion. Now, I know that that might be jarring for many of you, because it's not what we were told. The science is quite clear. We know full well that when, well, we're going to discuss it, when consciousness comes into being, consciousness is our awareness that a certain groove has been formulated by neurotransmitters between nerve end fibers in the brain. And if you repeat that thought more and more, the groove becomes deeper. So if your default response to provocation is one of anger, it means that you're cutting a deeper groove of the mind, making it more likely that you'll be angry again and again. And for those people who say, but I've got all this stuff inside that I've got to get out, I usually ask them, you've got stuff inside. Tell me, what color is it? What is its size? Whereabouts is it located? And of course, you can't answer to those questions because there's no stuff. Stuff is a piece of imagery that's been implanted in our minds. And if you come to believe it, you create the phantom of stuff. But it's an illusion. There's no stuff. Why do I speak about this? Because stress is no different. Stress is the way I interpret. And we have freedom of choice to interpret differently. If someone is yelling and screaming at you, how do you respond? Well, again, not you, but out there in the world. The self-talk usually is something like, how dare you speak to me like that? Who do you think you are? What chutzpah? Instead of, they're yelling and screaming, it means they're in pain, emotional pain or physical pain. People don't scream unless there is pain. What can I do to assist them? Now, what have I just done? I've reframed. I've reinterpreted. The same objective sounds, noise, and meanings, which I initially found provocative, I have reframed it, and instead of egotistically and selfishly thinking of myself, how dare you speak to me like that? I have moved the term of reference from me to the other. I've become empathic, even compassionate. Now, I'm not saying you can, in fact, help the other in the moment. Most unlikely. But you've changed your attitudinal response. In stress, it means that you haven't given yourself the wisdom and the space to reframe. And that's what I'd like to teach you tonight and share with you. Any thoughts or questions? I want to see if you're angry with me. Yes. Just speak up a fraction. Like what? Yes. You do, but you haven't really got your mind around it. It's a tragic circumstance when someone is hurt. But anger and stress are non-logical responses. If God forbid someone is hurt, that's all the more reason for us to be other-centered and enter actively into the role of assisting to the extent that we can. Anger and stress get in the way. What is historically the most developed Jewish army that ever existed. Do you recall? It was the army of David HaMelech, of King David. Every one of his soldiers was trained never to get angry in the heat of battle and not to undergo what you and I commonly today might call stress, because it gets in the way of efficiency. It gets in the way of strategic thinking. A good coach will coach his or her players not to lose it on the field, because that will interfere with their skill base. 2 of my sons served in the Israeli army. They served both as officers in a commando unit called Duvduvan. They each trained each of their unit members never to be angry or stressed under threat. I now have 2 grandsons in the tzava, and I'm hoping they're doing the same. There's no virtue, whether the result is because of illness or hurt or pain or threat to one's being, to engage in any of such mental attributes which are so negative. It gets in the way. So what do you do instead? Stick around, find out. Yes. You should have a reaction. I'm saying that we have natural emotions, 7 of them, as we learn in Kabbalah, and their expression and their flow is essential. But emotions don't have innate wisdom. Emotions don't have a compass bearing. Emotions are energetic. The mind, on the other hand, possesses the compass, the direction, the wisdom, but it doesn't have the energy that animates a person to activity, action. So we need to bring mind and emotion into sync in an ideal way. And the way that the Alter Rebbe taught it in the book of Tinge, for example, which Michael teaches here, is Moach Shalit al Halev, which means that the mind must determine the outcome of the emotions. So mind has to get there first and emotion second. Physiologically, it's the opposite. The emotions, which we are told are located through the area of the brain known as the limbic system, whereas our more intelligent thought processes are located through the prefrontal cortex. And in measuring the pace of the so-called neurotransmittic flow, they travel 3 to 4 times as fast through the limbic system as they do from the prefrontal cortex, which means, in simple language, you feel 3 to 4 times as fast as you think. You feel 3 to 4 times as fast as you think. And that's why you always blow it. The emotions get there first. The Johnny-come-lately of mind tries to catch up. But because it comes second, it's taken prisoner. What do we call it when the emotions take the mind prisoner? We call it rationalization. We give ourselves 101 reasons why the emotions were right, because the emotions have captured the mind. So what is the skill that we need to learn and practice, slow down the emotion flow, and accelerate the mind flow, so that there is a compass bearing that tells the emotions, now it's wise for you to flow there, but not there. And the West has finally caught up to these older Hasidic teachings of centuries ago and called it emotional intelligence, which is exactly what it is. So yes, you must emote, but instead of self-centered emotions, other-centered emotions, compassionate. Enter into the activity. You need to alleviate the plight of someone who's suffering, but be intelligent how you do it. Okay, let's go a step further. Gentleman's got a question. We'll make this the last question for the moment. Yes. 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 External circumstances that can cause potential stress. Yes. Stress is the human expression and experience of the gap, of the dissonance. In other words, they're not necessarily the source of the stress. They are the objective circumstances, as you correctly put, which we interpret maybe in a threatening way, but that's our interpretation. Okay? Right, definitely. The gentleman and I are still friends. It's okay. Good. But I'm going to give you, for those of you who don't want to spend time reframing, changing your habitual patterns, which requires practice, 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 I'm going to give you an easy answer. How never to be stressed, never to be angry, never to worry. And they're summarized in 2 words, Emunah and bitachon. You know what those words mean, because you know the translation. Emunah usually is translated as faith. Bitachon is usually translated as trust or security. The Israeli Minister of Defense is Sar HaBitachon, security. But I'm going to give them a more definitive meaning. Emunah is the belief that everything that has ever happened to you is for your current good. Bitachon is the belief that the challenge you face now in your life will have a positive outcome. In other words, Emunah deals from the past to the present. Anything that has ever happened to you, past, is for your current good, present. Bitachon deals from the present to the future. The challenge you face now will have a positive outcome. Now, these are axiomatic propositions. They're beliefs. And I'm talking to a rational audience. And a rational audience might challenge and say, I don't accept things on faith value. And I'll say to you, ridiculous. Of course you do. I can prove it to you. How did you get here tonight? You mean you drove in a car or rode in a car, knowing full well that at the very time that you drove, there were fatalities on the road in this country. And you, with perfect equanimity, stepped into the car, completely believing you'll come here. Don't tell me that's not belief. Of course it is. And in a workshop that I conduct, a half-day workshop, we discover how many of the things we do in our life that are completely based on belief and not rationality, because we couldn't function otherwise. All I'm asking you is, add a couple to your repertoire, the ones on screen. Do it for 1 month. I guarantee you that if you do it with kavanah, a word that needs explication in its own right, but let's say it means with proper intention, you will not have any stress or worry during the course of that month. Any questions there? Of course not. You have to go through the month. Then you have to come back to me. Okay, fine. Silly, of course. All right. There was a man who sold his house and bought a horse. And all his fellow villagers came to him and said, "You mean you sold a whole house to buy a single horse? You know how foolish that is?" And he said to them, "You don't know, wait and see." Next day, the horse ran away. And they came and laughed at him. And he said to them, "You don't know, wait and see." And next day, the following day, the horse comes back with 9 other horses following it. So they come to him and say, "Boy, you're a wise man." And he says to them, "You don't know, wait and see." He asks his oldest son to break the horses in. The son falls off and breaks his leg. They laugh at him. But the father says, "You don't know, wait and see." The following week, his country wages war on its neighbor. All the young men are conscripted. Many die in battle, except his son. He's got a broken leg. So they say to him, "You're a very wise man." To which he says, "You don't know, wait and see." People, we don't know. Unless in this audience there is a prophet or prophetess, in which case I apologize to you. You don't know. You've got a 50% probability that if you take a positive interpretation of seemingly challenging circumstances, then the result could well be positive or negative. Why choose the negative? And the answer is because we're being programmed that way. Media is programming that way. We're becoming insecure human beings, and insecurity brings the worst out of us. It's in states of insecurity that our lower order expressions come to the fore. A person becomes angry because they want to exercise power and control over the other, whatever the other might be. Anger is an attempt to threaten the other. Because if I can make you do what I want you to do, I will feel better. It's all about me. But therein lies a black hole of insecurity. That's why I project in that particular manner. In fact, all negative emotional and mental expressions are a product of pachad, inner fear, which will lead me to my next discussion, but you had a question. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the lady's saying that in positive thinking, the danger might well be that if you simply leave it at positive thinking and no action, then it just stays like that and you don't necessarily create positive outcomes. Totally agree with you. If you leave it at the level of just mere attitude. I subscribe very much to the formal school of positive psychology that's primarily based in Oxford. Let me share with you one of the approaches to show you what we're talking about when we're talking about positive thinking. Say your child has found a weakness in math. What would you as a parent naturally do? You'd get a tutor to assist the student. The School of Positive Psychology would say you're making a big mistake. By getting a tutor in math, you're emphasizing to the student, to your child, that they're weak in something. You should get a tutor, but not in math. Then in what? You identify in your child what your child is good at, its gift, because every child is gifted. And get a tutor for that gift so that it will excel. And when the excellence becomes obvious, it so reinforces the child that eventually the weakness will go in its own right. Very different approach. Positive thinking means that through my positive thinking, I create positive actions. You're quite correct. But before we act, we have a mental posture that we adopt. And that mental posture affects our emotional posture. And the two in unison produce body action. Body action comes third. Now, it's very interesting what you say, because very often we learn, say, going back to anger, the best way is to walk away. And that's true. Walking away from a provocation is a good approach, but it's not the Jewish approach. The Jewish approach is you're not allowed to walk away, but you have to transform it into an empathic compassion that allows you to enter into the fray and help remedy the situation. You're not allowed just to walk away. So it must translate into action. Okay. Self-esteem. Personal significance. I began that way. I said, all of you are significant. Every single one of you. The proof, you're alive. Hashem wouldn't bring you here unless you couldn't contribute something. It's a bit like a Sefer Torah. You know full well that if there's one letter missing in the Sefer Torah, or if the letter is deficient in some way, it renders the whole Sefer Torah posel, which means invalid. In the same way, if one person is missing, it makes the whole world unable to exist. But the only way you can justify your existence is by actively conferring on each one of us your giftedness. You're not allowed to hold back. You can't practice false humility. Who was in Jewish history the most humble person in existence as far as modeling is concerned in our tradition? Moses, yes. Moshe Rabbeinu. Really? Moses? General? Chief Justice? Arbiter of all Jewish disputes? Can you think of a worse job? He was a strong, almost dictatorial figure, leading a rabble of 600,000 families for 40 years. Come on, you're going to tell me this was the meek, mild-mannered Clark Kent? He was a regular Superman. How can he be the epitome of humility, turning the other cheek? Because turning the other cheek is not a Jewish teaching, it's a Christian teaching. We have to distinguish between assertiveness and control. We're not allowed to be controlling, and yet we must be assertive. What's the difference? If I seek to exercise power and control over you, or if a parent tries to control their children, or if a nation tries to control another nation, they're able to do so. A parent is stronger than the child. One nation may have more weapons than the other, but inevitably there'll be rebellion. We know that from all of history. If the parent wants to control the child and attempts to do so, then at the age of 15 or 16, when they have wheels, they will run away. More likely, they will emotionally run away, which is even more hurtful. Don't try to control anyone. It's bound to fail in a bad way. Yet you have to use your giftedness in such a way that you confer it on the world. A parent has to utilize insight and wisdom and allow the children to follow that. How do you do that? That's where the word assertiveness comes in. Assertiveness means you believe in the rightness of your position to the extent that you will enter into the life of the other and share it despite them. Of course, you have to strategize that the way you do it is a way that will be accepted by the other. That may take time. Raising children takes years. It doesn't happen from one moment of control. But it's very, very important not to exercise control. As I said to a group a little earlier on before this session, that when you discipline a child, the child has only to look into your eyes to know where that discipline is coming from. Is it coming from your egotistic frustration, or is it coming from your love? The resulting discipline may be exactly the same. But the child, despite its youth and inability to use the mind to deduce or induce, is able to somehow from the very essence of itself to recognize what's going on inside of you. And if you're doing it out of frustration, the child will know she or he is not doing it because of love or they love me. They're doing it for themselves because they need to. Very, very important. So significance means to be able to take your giftedness and confer it on the world, individually and collectively, individually and with a sense of universality. And if you do have a sense of personal significance, it's going to be a wonderful antidote to stress. Stress is when you feel helpless, when you feel in some shape caught in between. But if you know that you count, you're significant, then you will take a longer-term view and be able to overcome the sense of gap or dissonance. meditation. And I do want to practice tonight's meditation. I'm going to take you through 2 or 3 exercises, depending on what your tolerance level is. Your significance comes from knowing that you are an expression of something bigger than you. We had a discussion earlier tonight with a group as to the dichotomy between our spiritual selves and our physical selves. And I used the following example. I said 2 seconds before a person dies, their ears can hear. And 2 seconds after they die, their ears no longer hear. Their eyes no longer see. And in those 2 seconds, there hasn't been that degree of decomposition that would have prevented natural hearing or natural seeing. What has happened? So you'll say, of course, they're dead. But what does death mean? What does it mean to tell me they're dead? 2 seconds ago they could hear, and 2 seconds later they can't hear. What's happened? So I use the example of that your body is machinery, biological machinery, complex machinery. It's like a vehicle, a car. And I said, a car doesn't drive itself. It needs a driver, which was quickly, I was corrected and told, yes, cars do drive themselves today. But let's keep the original analogy. Death means the driver's left. The energy flow, whatever you want to call it. Call it soul, call it neshama, call it energy, doesn't matter. But something has left. And therefore we are a dichotomy of 2 dimensions. Our ultimate personality, as we learn in Hasidus and Kabbalah, is in our soul, not our body. The body is the mechanism whereby our innate personality can express itself, even through the genes. Our genetic makeup is still dependent on our spiritual underlying self. And therefore, there's an absolute mitzvah to be healthy. And you're not allowed to do anything that would cause ill health. And this mitzvah is no different than the mitzvah of Shabbat or Kashrut or anything else. It's of the same order. And therefore, in a world where, for example, one of the main features of health, which is the way we eat and what we eat, has become so corrupted, we are duty-bound under Jewish law to investigate all the kind of elements that enter into the food chain, one way or another, that causes ill health. But that's just a side point. So essentially, I'm an expression of a spiritual flow called a spiritual umbilical cord. One end is located in your body, and the other end is located in God. Or as I described it, you are a projection on a screen of time and space. In the same way as that is a projection from a projector, so are you and I projections from a projector. Except we also have free choice. We're the joker of the pack. We can ruin things and have the ability to ruin things. That's what freedom of choice means. Hashem made a contract with us, a 50-50 partnership. God said, I'll do my part, but I'm giving you the freedom to do your part. You can do it, you don't have to do it. You can mess it up or don't mess it up. But we nevertheless are a projection from a higher screen. That makes you holy. The word holy is an antiquated English word. English itself is a very poor language. It would be much better if we spoke Hebrew to each other. English is a bastard language. It's made up of Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, Romance languages, European languages, Latin, Greek. You can give a lecture in English for an hour and no one will know anything what you're talking about. It's marvelous, the freedom it gives. Whereas Hebrew is a very, very exact language, a language of creation. We must discuss that another time. All right. Meditation is a way of training to undo the proclivity for stress, anger, and all negative emotions. Now, if you consult Professor Google as to what is meditation, you'll find an infinite array of things that it says. You know, meditation provides awareness, calm, attentiveness. It allows you to focus better, provide mind control. It solves problems. It gives you contentedness. It allows you to practice mindfulness. It gives you a relaxed state. It helps you sleep better. It retains your memory better, gives you balance, and all these other things. It alleviates stress, anxiety, you name it. It's the best wonder drug available today. Do you believe that? Well, there is some truth in it. But you have to pick the right therapeutic approach for the right outcome, for the right condition. And then apart from all these goodies, you've got an issue of modalities. Which way do I practice what? There is breath-based focusing techniques. Then you've got visualization techniques, sound-based techniques, transcendental meditation approaches. You've got movement-based meditations. You've got Jewish meditation like Hisbonenus. You've got Eastern meditations like Vipassana. Which one? So there's a lot of confusion, especially in the marketplace. And we have to try to wade into here and find an approach that works. The first question is, you must have a purpose to meditate. There is a basic difference between Eastern meditations and, say, Jewish meditations. Much of Eastern meditation, and I'm generalizing, deals on emptying the mind, creating non-attachment, being able to be here now, very similar to what mindfulness is its expression in a more secular context. Whereas Jewish meditation seeks to fill the mind. So if I were to share with you the Jewish approach known as Hisbonenus, or in modern Hebrew, Hitbonenut, it will go something like this. I practice it every morning. It consists of sitting down, studying a piece of wisdom teaching from one of the masters, one of the Rebbes, study it for half an hour, 15 minutes, longer, and then extract one element from that teaching and internalize it meditatively so that it becomes alloyed to you in such a way that your behavior during the course of the day expresses it. Very different. And there are many approaches. They all have legitimacy in their own right, except one major problem. And this is controversial. You know when meditation became popular? You'll remember. It is when a group of Eastern gurus came across to the West and introduced stylistic meditation. Before that, the word meditation existed. What did it mean? Deep thought. But then it took on a different meaning. There was a methodology to meditating, and there were certain ways of meditating. But they are primarily Eastern meditations that we're referring to when we say meditation. And a lot of them were Hindu-based. And therefore, in the Hindu meditations, there was a lot of what we call idol worship, avodah zarah. And this is harmful for the Jewish soul, for all sorts of reasons which I can explain spiritual dynamics of, but not at this moment. And therefore, believe it or not, the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis, prohibited the practice of meditation in the 60s and 70s, and even a bit longer than that, for fear that the idol worship element, which is so foreign for us, comes into the picture. Until the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in 1979, said publicly that meditation is important and necessary. And I'm going to quote to you over 2 slides, extract from a very well-known public discourse that he made it popular and sought that we should enter into practice of meditation for therapeutic reasons. The kind of thing we're talking about, alleviating stress. And what the Rebbe spoke about was that the world was entering, remember this is 1979, into a period which is going to be highly stressful, and we need to have methodology to counter it. So something like this. These are just a few paragraphs. The Rebbe said, meditation has its roots in the very beginning of Jewish heritage. Obviously, there's a thing called Jewish meditation. However, non-kosher approaches have spread throughout the world and through Israel, and they call it by a refined name, transcendental meditation. They've also incorporated into the procedures approaches that are clearly avodah zarah, the worship of false gods. Since we're living in the darkness of Golus, exile, many Jewish people have fallen prey to these. Since there are many Jewish sufferers, stress, who continue to avail themselves of these methods despite rabbinic prohibition, drawn by the promise of mental relief, it would be preferable to receive the same treatment in a kosher way from the medical profession. It is suggested and strongly urged that appropriate action be undertaken to enlist the cooperation of a group of doctors specializing in neurology and psychiatry. Remove from Eastern meditation the trappings that might be offensive, but don't throw the baby away with the bathwater. There's value. And since then, a number of medical researchers and others took it on, and some of you might remember the name of Dr. Herbert Benson. Dr. Herbert Benson in the 80s developed exactly what the Rebbe was asking, a neutral form of therapeutic meditation which allows us to de-stress. He called it the relaxation response mechanism. And he wired people up to measure what was happening physiologically in their bodies as they meditated in this way. And he identified 7 or 8 remarkable changes that took place in the body when we meditate. Things like your skin resistance changes, your heart rate changes, the kind of energy flow from the brain moves from alpha, beta to theta, etc., etc. There's something real that takes place otherwise. Put one hand on your tummy and put one hand on your chest. And I want you to work out which hand is moving more. Okay. How many of you found that the chest seemed to be moving more? How many of you found that the tummy seemed to be moving more? Okay. So some of you are right and some of you are wrong. What part of a baby tends to move most when it's at peace and rest or sleeping? Tummy. The tummy moves in and out, much less the chest. When we become stressed, when we run the 100-yard dash, or someone is threatening us, which part of what moves most? Chest. Because we need to oxygenate the body very quickly, so we gulp in air, and that's shallow, but it is greater in the way that it affects us in the short term, but that's called stressed breathing. We've forgotten how to breathe as a baby. Therefore, Dr. Benson said, let's induce a state of inner peace by changing the way we breathe. And by changing the way we breathe, we can induce a state of inner balance. And it works. As I showed to you, physiologically it does. Scientists have shown us that there are two ways in which we tend to use our brains. One is called non-linear, and the other one's called central executive. Non-linear means creative thinking, the kind of thinking that you're involved in when you're lying on the beach, when you're daydreaming, when you are fairly relaxed, in a shower. Why do you get your best ideas in the shower? It's real. It's real. Whereas central executive is when your mind is very deliberate, highly focused, task-oriented, goal-oriented, problem-solving mode. The kind of things we worry in our children when they aren't good at that, and then we worry about ADD and ADHD, and we run to dozens of doctors about that. But we don't think about the non-linear capacities of our children, the creative capacities. What we have seen in research on screen as our technologies have improved, that when we're involved in central executive kind of activity of the brain, very little of the brain is being used, believe it or not. When we're highly concentrating, a very narrow slice of brain is being used. And would you believe that when we're leisurely daydreaming, almost the totality of the brain is being used? This is totally counterintuitive. Why? Because non-linear is creative. We're taking an association of diverse ideas and allowing them loosely to connect. Whereas when we're directing our thoughts, we can't make those associations. That's why if you problem solve, one of the ways is move away from the problem for a day or two. Or nominate the problem at night and wait till morning and answers come. Because you're allowing the loose association of ideas to work almost subconsciously for you. We've known about this for hundreds of years, what's being discovered now. If you come to Michael's classes, you would have learned these basics. We have 3 mind facilities called Chokhmah, Binah, and Da'at. Chokhmah means giving birth to an idea. How do you give birth to an idea? You know that thought that you were thinking earlier tonight, yesterday, last year? Where did that thought come from? You mean it just popped into your head? No thoughts pop into the head. They have a long and honorable journey. Western psychology will say, yeah, they come from the subconscious, which is another way of saying, I haven't got the faintest idea. Chachma is my mechanism of being able to draw on that spiritual umbilical cord and materialize that flow in the spark of consciousness in the moment, the beginnings of a thought. Some people are better at it than others. It's trainable. You can become more creative if you train and master the Chachma mechanism. It's the non-linear side of the brain, or activity of the brain. Then what do you do next? Next, you give it length, breadth, and depth. What's that called? That's called analysis. You understand, you try to understand. That is central executive. That is what we call Bina processing. And we've known about this for 250 years. And then there's a third step, which the West still has to catch up on, Da'at. The commitment to the idea to such an extent that there's a transition from mind to emotions. Not going to dwell there. So there's a whole area of learning we have in our treasury of Jewish teachings that helps us understand how we actually operate. Example. You're in the kitchen and you go to the dining room to get something and you stop in your tracks in the dining room because you've forgotten what you went there for, right? Happened to you? Thanks, I'm much reassured. So what do you do next? You go back to the kitchen and say, what's happened? Chachma took place in the kitchen, Bina took you to the dining room, and then you lost your Chachma. So you went back to the kitchen and found it again. Simple as that. That may be trite, but it's really, if you analyze it, what's been happening. The soul of an idea must stay in the idea. If an architect has an inspiration for a design, in the development of the plans, in the engineering component, in the artisanship of the stonework or the brickwork, the original idea must still be there. The soul of the idea must run through right to the very end. Chachma must always exist inside Bina, and both of them must all exist inside Da'at. If you want to develop that, there are a couple of classes I noticed that are here that you should be attending. Introduction to Kabbalah and User's Guide for the Soul. Okay. That's as far as I want to take theory tonight. I now want to do a couple of exercises with you. Okay? So what am I going to do? I'm going to first take you through a neshima meditation, a breath-based meditation. Not because breath focusing is so common and easy, but what's the word for breath in Judaism, in Hebrew? Neshima. What's the word for soul? Neshama. Obviously the same etymological source. Because in our teachings, breath is the first level of expression of the soul. The way you breathe reveals the way that the soul is flowing through the body. And through the biofeedback loop, change the way you breathe, and you change the way that the neshama flows through the body, the guf. Undo stress. So if you catch yourself becoming stressful, that's a half-a-day workshop already, to catch yourself in time. Then you start practicing a neshima meditation to create the space. What's the space for? To reframe the way that the mind and the emotions are competing for your higher attention. So, let's try it. Put everything out of your hands. Put it on the floor. Don't worry, I will not levitate it. It'll be there afterwards, okay? Put your hands on your knees or thighs, feet symmetrically on the ground, back fairly straight, head well balanced on your shoulders, and gently close your eyes. And just focus on your breath, breathing quite normally. And if you can, prefer to breathe in and out through your nose. And as you do, become aware of the temperature difference between the air entering your nasal passages compared to the temperature of the air as it leaves your nasal passages. Cooler air entering, warmer air exiting. And just stay focused on that temperature differential. Deepen and slow down your in-breath and your out-breath, making that temperature difference even more apparent. And with your next breath in, draw the breath down to your abdomen. And the way to do that is expand your abdomen as you breathe in and contract your abdomen as you breathe out. So take a slow, deep breath in, expanding your abdomen, collecting the air, and then pull your tummy in to expel the air. As I said earlier, this is a little counterintuitive, so you need to practice that. Slow, deep breath in, expanding your abdomen, and pulling the abdomen back in, contracting it to expel the air. Breathing in, expanding your abdomen. To breathe out, contract the abdomen. And practice that for the next few breaths. And let's lend some rhythm to the breathing. We'll breathe in for a count of 3. We'll hold for a count of 3. And then we will let out for a count of 4. So take a slow, deep breath in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, out, 2, 3, 4. And just continue breathing abdominally, rhythmically, gracefully, deeply, a perfect circle. And just sense in the back of your mind how relaxed you have become in the space of a few short minutes. Something you can achieve whenever you choose to. universe breathes. God breathes life into the universe. Everything breathes in and out. The sun rises, the sun sets, the tide comes in, the tide goes out. The petals open, the petals close. Everything breathes in and out. Focus again on the air entering the nose and the air exiting. Cooler air, warmer air. Begin moving your fingers and your toes here in the room. Move your fingers. Move your toes now. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes, coming all the way back. Doesn't that feel better? You weren't stressed during those several minutes. You forgot about it because I had a new focus for you. Your breathing. And God has created us in a very special way. You can't think of two things at the same time. Have you noticed? I help people, for example, who wake up 3 o'clock in the morning and can't go back to sleep because they're ruminating. All the negatives of the day in their life comes back at 3 o'clock in the morning. And what happens is they wake up each night, therefore, on cue at 3 o'clock. Remarkably so. So I teach them a methodology called displacement. I get them to practice 2 or 3 beautiful thoughts. And there's a way of practicing in a very systematic way. And they've got to be powerful thoughts, beautiful emotions during the course of their life, choosing the best. When they become familiar with that, I get them to slip that new slide into their mind just at the moment when the negativity is hitting. And since we can't think of 2 things at the same time, they have to focus on that. What you're in fact doing when you repeat that over and over again is you're breaking that circuitry of the mind where I said the neurotransmitters flow between 2 new nerve end fibers. And when you repeat a thought pattern, you deepen the groove. And the more you think about it, the deeper is the groove, more likely to repeat. So if you wake up 3 o'clock at night and think negatively, you're deepening the groove, making it more likely you'll do it the next night and the next night. But if you immediately displace it with a positive image, you're creating a competitive new groove of the night. And that way, you can make the old one become a disused roadway. And you have grass growing on it. And you have a beautiful new tarred road that your mind follows afterwards. So what I did was, I got you to concentrate on your breath. In so doing, I got you to really concentrate on your soul flow without you realizing it, changing it. And the result is that you had to empty any stress in that duration of time. It doesn't solve a problem. Problem solving requires different techniques. But it creates for you the space to be able to begin the problem solving from a position of neutrality, and also takes much less toll on your body. It's repeated accumulated stress that breaks your body down. If you need to restart it, it has much less hurt on your body. Another discussion. All right, I'd like to do one more if your tolerance level is there for one more. You were told that this is a 4-hour seminar, didn't you? Okay. Gratitude. I'll only do one more. You know, when you wake up, the first posture you adopt becomes a subliminal template for the rest of the day. If you wake up in a state of fear, I don't want to face the world. I want just to lie in bed and the covers cover me. It's very likely that every one of your responses during the day will have a negative tinge to them, one which is based in fear. So if we deliberately adopt a positive posture first thing in the morning, the result is that that positivity will also characterize our responses during the day. So we Jewish people have practiced for eons a positive affirmation called Modeh Ani, which some of you might recall from your early Sunday school days, but of course dismissed it because you became far too sophisticated for something like that. And you've lost a very important tool that you're now going to regain in your mature years. I mentioned earlier to a group that the primary tool that Hashem used to create the world is a tool called Chesed. Chesed means loving kindness. There are 10 tools called the Sefirot. Again, go to Michael's class, you'll know all about these 10 tools. Chesed is the dominant one. The world is based on sharing and giving. That's the natural default. The earth is the feminine side of the cosmos. The earth inherently nurtures and gives. That's why if you put a seed into the soil, the seed is a male dimension, and the earth is the female dimension, and the nurture of earth will ensure that growth takes place. And it cuts across everything in the universe, masculinity and femininity. All men are both masculine and feminine. All women are masculine and feminine. What makes a person masculine as a man is there's a dominance of the masculine quality. But sometimes a man has to call on his feminine side because that's more appropriate in the moment. And vice versa. A woman sometimes has to call on her masculine side behaviorally in order to be able to deal with a particular set of circumstances. Chochmah is masculine relative to Bina, what we said earlier. These things are all discussed. So, Chesed is a feminine quality of nurture, and it is expressed in gratitude. What does it mean to say thank you? What happens when I say thank you? What's dynamically happening when I say thank you? In that moment, I'm reframing. I'm taking the center of gravity from me and making you the center of gravity. Thank you. A genuine thank you means I lower my profile in myself and increase the profile of you. That's a genuine thank you. So that's what we call gratitude. That's Toda Raba, which relates to the word Hoda, the process of gratitude. And that's why we begin with the word modeh ani, which is again an expression of the same verb. All right, that's enough background. Adopt your position of symmetry. Hands resting on knees and thighs. Gently close your eyes. Focus on your breath, entering your nose and exiting. Cooler air entering, warmer air exiting. And just follow my voice. Modeh ani. I thank you. Modeh ani. I acknowledge you. Modeh ani. I abnegate my ego and allow you into my life. Modeh ani. I thank you, Hashem, for bringing me back in a state of consciousness, allowing me today to play a role that only I can play on the stage of existence. Modeh ani. I acknowledge that everything that will occur today is for my ultimate good. Modeh ani. I'll practice humility, and in so doing, have a wider vision of reality. Modeh ani. Thank you, Hashem, for restoring to me this morning my giftedness, my specialness, my capacity to enrich the world in the way that I only can. Modeh ani. I acknowledge that should things occur today that prove challenging, even, God forbid, hurtful, I will trust you in that everything occurs for my growth, my development, my enlightenment. Modeh ani lefanecha. I thank you, Hashem, right here in your presence. Melech chai v'kayam. You, the King who animates and maintains all of existence. Shehechazarta bi nishmati. for you have restored to me my own personal soul, my essential quality of me. Bechemla, you have done this with mercy, because I may not have deserved another opportunity. Raba Emunatecha, great is your faith in me, and I will not let you down today. And spend 20 seconds internalizing that message, making it part of you so you can express it today. Focus again on your breath, gently breathing in and breathing out. Begin moving your fingers and your toes here in the room. Move your fingers, move your toes. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes, coming all the way back here into the room. Isn't that a better way of waking up in the morning? Now, if you do this 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, 365 days a year, for 120 years, you should get it. Like all things, practice, practice, practice. Let me leave you with this thought. You want to learn to play the piano, say you can't. But you're a modern person. You're not going to do the old-fashioned approach. You're going to spend 12 months learning about music. You'll learn academically how all the notes relate to each other. You'll learn all about the great composers, the Chopins, the Mozart, the Tchaikovskys, the Brahms, you name it. At the end of 12 months, you will know everything about music. At the end of the year, you sit down at the piano and you say, fingers, do your stuff. And guess what? The fingers don't do their stuff. Why? And you'll say, it's obvious. It's not at all obvious. If my mind knows everything about music, why doesn't the extremity of my body called fingers also know it? It's illogical. I either know it or I don't know it. But of course, we've learned that answer because we haven't yet made the connection, that groove of the mind that connects the mind to the fingers. So we go back to the old-fashioned way and we learn the piano by repeating the scales and practicing, practicing, practicing. It's no different with mind and emotion. These are our two consciousness pathways. And unless you learn the scales of that music, and unless you repeat it over and over again, there's no way that you'll get it right. But you can get it right. You don't have to practice for a year. Our research tells us a period of 1 to 2 months for most people will undo a habit and set down a new habit. That's not much. The problem is that people live 120 years and don't devote one day to practice. They say, I am the way I am. I was born that way. That's not true. You were born with a proclivity. You do have a genetic predisposition, but you have choice. And you're able to train your body, to train your mind and emotion the way you choose. So choose wisely, because it'll make a huge difference in your relational life, from which happiness and fulfillment grows, and allow you to make a much bigger contribution to others. Okay, that's about all I want to share tonight, but for those of you who would like to continue, please do so with Michael Cantor Smolesh. I have brought some of my materials with me on various topics. The ones that I've brought with me deal with these particular topics. The way that it operates is they're on CDs, the subject matter, and the meditations for each on each of the CDs. If you don't like CDs because you've outgrown them, there's a USB there which has all the CDs on one nice little wooden USB. For those of you who would like better to read about things, the book has nothing to do with that. Sorry. Random House very kindly published my book dealing with the nature of personality, looking at a psychological vantage point, comparing to the Jewish spiritual vantage point. So feel free, but I'd like to sign any books that anyone buys. You also have raffle slips, and in about 3-4 minutes, or even now, I'm going to give them a bit more time. In about 4 or 5 minutes, bring it to the table, and we'll have a raffle, and someone will win one of the products on the table. Please be in touch with me. I love to communicate, and in so doing, I can again continue learning from you. Thank you very much for a lovely evening.
Thank you to Laibl. I highly suggest picking up some of his materials and being in touch with him if you'd like. And we have, as Laibl said, classes Monday morning and Thursday morning available, so please put your name down for that if you'd like. And we can open up another slot in the evenings. So if you want to put your name down and say what evenings are good, we'll find the best time other than Friday. Right? Beautiful work. Thank you.